to reconsider and be like, okay, we're fully on board.
We're right
It's
next
just
to
sort of
it.
like, if we're talking renting a Bud Light bar vortex rate, it's like, we may take a year off and come back next year, because that was
Please
not
tell me it's something
cheap.
Oh, no, it's you know, it's just, the bar is officially called the redheaded stepchild. But, you know, they don't have that on the front of it. Floppy disk repair, and you're like, okay, sure.
Yeah, nobody will get.
Nobody will go in, you know?
I was impressed that.
It went as well as it possibly could, given the weather.
Why don't you guys make yourself comfortable?
Their places are ramshackle. It's a ramshackle place, ramshackle. Council legislature is, it's just different. It's indoors and it's, solid, you know, so, I'm just saying that we've done it there.
Yeah, no, I'm certainly down to rotate the event, because we've, in the past, we've traditionally rotated events, we've done them at Schultz, we've done this in other places. So yeah, you know, there's an argument to be made that even if like, we do additional events to Butterfly in the future, which I will, because I like working with the people there, but there's an argument to rotate.
Just try to put stuff out.
I'm gonna just give it a few more minutes, see if
Yeah.
anybody else filters in.
I was just gonna check and see if there's any water anywhere.
Pretty cool.
Was John planning on coming to this?
He's not gonna make this one. Apparently, he's in meetings all day or something. I don't know the details. But he was like, sorry, can't make it.
That's too bad.
Yeah, you know.
He was on a panel actually that my co-founder was moderating last week.
Oh, that's right. He was mentioning that. It was that blockchain one, right? Yeah. He was having me talking about needing to research for that. So, yeah, I hope that went well. There's always so many things to attend. I can't go to all of them. But yeah. But yeah, I think we're just going to give it a few more minutes, see if anybody else filters in here. And then I will do my announcements and hand it over to them. I'll probably have like 5-7 more minutes and then we can get started.
Hey, do you know much about uninterruptible systems for servers?
Not a ton, no. I mean, other than just like buying a backup battery power pack for your desk, I don't know anything beyond that really. I'm not an expert in like server infrastructure architecture, that sort of thing. I'm learning more and more about it all the time, but that's not what my current specialty is. Now, you need full stack web programming. In the Microsoft environment, I know a lot about that.
I asked that because,
Yeah, Tiana, you're
my new project is, partner that makes really high-end, batteries, and they're cool, like they, you can use them as UPS for data centers, they're also like portable and swappable, and you can do like off-grid, events.
Interesting. I mean, it sounds almost like it's a cross between a traditional backup server power pack and maybe almost like a Tesla wall
I'd
mount.
like to try
It's like the
KVM
Tesla
inside
battery,
of
but with one key
cubes, so I
difference.
can get Ansible running.
Lithium-ion batteries, they said it doesn't probably, it's all thermal that way, and those things ever caught on fire, it would burn very, very high temperature. Eventually, the Tesla batteries gotta catch on fire.
And it's going to be a PR disaster.
PR disaster, these things are a different temperature, they don't
Right.
they can't catch on
I
fire.
mean, yeah, I mean, lithium ion is infamous for having a lot of drawbacks. It's one of the main reasons battery tech can't move forward. There's certain physical, chemical limitations and stuff against the that system.
So there's other chemistries that use lithium iron phosphate or lithium ferrous phosphate, which was an old guy at UT named John Goodenough. So it's like,
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah, he's the battery guy. Didn't he actually just have another breakthrough where he found a new system?
it's like 95. still,
I know.
one of the most active.
Well, it basically doesn't work like that, than anyone else alive, and he'd already changed the field once, and it looks like he may have just done it again. I have not dealt with the paper challenge yet, but it does sound like he might have read through it, yeah.
So he came up with the idea of using iron, like lithium ferrous phosphate for energy storage systems. He's a key innovator, and it's just now kind of being commercialized. So a friend of mine started a company that's specifically dedicated to competing, against Tesla in chemistry. So pretty interesting stuff.
Right, just, I want to make sure our light screen's on, and I think we need to go, and enough people feel it.
Okay.
Easier just to do that, to change.
Everything's set up so that it gets, goes together. So you're going against, like, swimming against the current. That works. That's good.
I do with VMs, but yeah, I put it to 1.9. The time, amount of time is, I don't know, we wouldn't have found the bug we did before. We were using 1.9 already, though. So.
Yeah.
Alright, got enough people
It's like,
here.
they're all falling.
I know. No, we're gonna get started here. I just had to deal with saying, I was making sure our live stream was on, and it is. Alrighty, welcome everybody to the EFF Austin Monthly Meetup. Great to see all of you. So, as a lot of you know, I am Kevin Welch. I'm the current board president here at EFF Austin. And traditionally, before we get started, I do a couple announcements, order of events sort of things. So let's see, what is relevant to the community? First of all, we of course will have a meetup next month. Currently, I have former EFF Austin board member Maggie Duvall is slotted to speak because it is Austin Startup Week, and she's going to be giving an enlivening talk about being in the early 90s Bay Area startup culture. So if you want a lot of historical hacker tech geeky goodness, you should definitely come out for that one. Okay, what else we have coming up? There's a couple sort of talks that EFF Austin board members are going to be engaged with. First of all, we're going to be participating in that UT does a film screening series called like Controversy and Conversation. They're going to be doing one in October about the documentary Kill Switch, which is on Netflix if you want to watch it. But the board is going to be present there. Also, our blogger Amanda is planning to write a blog post in response to it, which they requested from us. So you can come out and join us at that. I believe, yeah, if you Google Controversy and Conversation, you should be able to get more info from UT. We also are participating in, we are going to be giving a talk to the freshman class at Concordia University about the themes raised by the book The Circle. Andrew, who is here, is going to be giving the talk. Board Member Andrew. So if you feel like hearing Concordia's freshmen educated on the issues we talk about, that can be a fun thing to go out to. See, any other major news that we have I need to report? This is when I would ask John, but he's not here. Can't think of anything too major I need to report off the top of my head other than those announcements. Oh, I guess I'm also going to say, continuing our tradition we started at the last board meetup, we are always trying to find ways to better serve the community and our mission to all of you, and that includes increasing our ability to fund our efforts at more effective legislative advocacy. So we've basically begun doing a pass the hat around at meetups here to try to solicit donations just to get in the habit of that. So I've got an envelope here if anybody would like to contribute. They have cash on them. If you don't, I forgot my card reader this time, but you can go right now on our website, EFFaustin.org, and click the donate link if you'd like to give to our PayPal. But just like to put it in people's minds, so I'll be passing this around in a sec. Let's see. I think there was one other thing I wanted to bring up. Where was it? Probably something important that I'll remember in a minute. No, I think we're okay for now. Okay, good. In that case, I'm going to turn things over to our speaker here. Actually, one more thing, which is we, based on our last meetup, have sort of been facilitating interest in the Indie Web project, which Tom here has been leading and facilitating. So if you're more interested in the Indie Web project, which is basically a project to create social media that bypasses the centralization of today's current Facebooks and what have you, then you should give Tom here and talk about that project, because they've started having meetups and they need more people to help get the Austin chapter really going. I think that's everything. Also, I guess quickly I will turn it over to the community. Does anybody in the community have something they'd like to share?
Just going to mention that it's not too early to do brainstorming on March party. So
That too.
maybe learning from what we did last time and moving it forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Owen, absolutely. So if anybody has fun ideas about things we might do next South by, should let us know. So far, all we have is hopefully a couple panel talks that we hope will get selected and be in the festival. But if anybody else has other ideas regarding venues or people who should be involved in the South by festivities, we do definitely let us know. Okay.
So we've got a Bitcoin meetup Tuesday nights at Central Market in North Austin, Lamar, and one of my friends is going to be putting on a Bitcoin conference in the end of October here in Austin. And so some rudimentary searching should find that if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, that's right up our alley. We are fans of Bitcoin here. So. Oh, and Tom, yes, do you want to talk a little more about the Indie Web project?
Yeah, like Kevin mentioned, we had our first homebrew website club meeting last week, and we decided we're going to try it once a month. So the next one's going to be October 4th. So if you're interested in, meeting people who are working on their own Indie Web sites, the next homebrew website will be October 4th.
Is that going to be in Monkey's Nest again, or is it going to be somewhere else?
To be disclosed later.
Okay, you guys are...
We're going to try to be closer to downtown.
Okay, so somewhere else. Okay, and is there a meetup group yet people can follow for it? Has that been spun up?
No, right now the main place we put the details on are the indieweb.org's homebrew website, wiki page.
Okay, so yeah, I guess just go to indieweb.org if you want to know more for the time being. Infrastructure will slowly get spun up, but that's where you can find out for now. Okay, I think that is everything. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to our speaker here, Wendy Nather. Wendy, for any of you who attended our last South by party, was one of our speakers there, and we invited her back to basically she had to give a somewhat a bridge talk due to time constraints, so we've invited her back to give a more full discussion of the differences between physical and online identity and some of the fun implications of that these two things are not exactly the same. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Wendy Nather to do a security here.
Thank you.
past that.
Yeah, so I did get to speak at the after party in March, in the rain. It was intense. Sorry, dad joke. Yeah, this is a slightly longer one, and this is kind of a boring title, so this is the actual title. So I'm going to talk about what we are missing in terms of system design, in terms of legal and electronic bridges to help with, in a word, delegation. So, you know, we share lives, but we can't really delegate our identities. If you think about if you have children who are minors, you usually set up their accounts for them, but at some point, you know, that when they turn 18, they're supposed to be running their own lives, but there's no really good official standardized transition mechanism for them to start, you know, running their own show online. Either they kind of, you know, wander off with their Snapchat and my kids have a lot of gaming logins, so, you know, the question is, you know, if they can't charge anything right now, at what point can they start doing that? The temporarily incapacitated. Now, illnesses tend to come and go. There are a lot of people, especially towards the end of life, where their ability to manage their own affairs goes up and down. It's not a steady decline. There's no clear point where you say, right, that's it, you know, we're taking the digital keys away as well as the car keys. And first of all, you can't do that. That's going to ruin your relationship with your loved ones. But there's no clear time, and so I'm going to talk about how that waxing and waning presents problems that you don't find. There have been a lot of talks about if somebody passes away, what do you do with their accounts? And that's a little bit clearer. It's not easy, but it's a little bit clearer. But it's much harder when somebody is still alive. They don't believe they're incapacitated, or you don't want to declare them finally incapacitated, which is a binary state that can really, you know, ruin what's left of their lives. So we'll talk about that some. And generally, people with disabilities who need help navigating online, but they still need to have that autonomy. You know, both legal, emotional, physical, whatever. So I'll talk about an example about how tech doesn't keep up with this sort of thing. So my oldest turned 18, and we got a notification from Walgreens that I couldn't manage his prescriptions anymore, that he needed to set up an account and then authorize me to do this for him. And I said, oh, you know, he needs an account set up. Okay. So this is why it didn't really work out that well. The information that they keep on every person in Walgreens includes, you know, their name, their date of birth, their street address. They always ask you for the street address before they hand you the medication, and emails, especially so they can notify you when your prescriptions are ready, and a phone so they can also harass you and let you know that your prescriptions are ready. But the thing is, they're using this data for different things. First of all, the name and date of birth are so that you can tell two people apart. It's an identifier. So I was sitting in the doctor's office the other day, and somebody came out and asked for Wendy N. And I'm used to that being me. I'm the only Wendy Nather, I think, in the world. And of course, they wanted to protect my privacy, so they weren't going to say my whole last name, but I'm used to being the only Wendy N anywhere. And I got all the way back into the labs, and just before they were about to stick me, they said, what's your date of birth again? And I told them, they said, oh, wrong Wendy. There was another Wendy in the exam room, and that had never happened. I was really glad that they did that check. So identifiers are one thing, authenticators are the other, making sure that that person really is who they claim to be. So you're supposed to, again, when they ask you your address, you're supposed to be the only one who knows your address, and therefore they can give you the meds. Same thing with the email. With email in particular, that's a very, a poor man's form of two-factor authentication these days, where they figure you are the only one using that email address, so therefore they can send you things, and you're the only one who will get them, so that's kind of proof that if you have control of that account, that you're who you say you are. Same thing with the phone. More and more with our phones, you know, we're using two-factor auth. Hey. So the problem with these things is that with the SSN, as we all kind of, this came to the fore with the latest and greatest Equifax breach, that the SSN, first of all, is not a foolproof identifier. I used to work for the Texas Education Agency, and you would think that an SSN is supposed to identify a unique individual. It doesn't. When you have families who maybe have one working member of the family who's got an SSN, and a kid goes to school and, you know, comes back and says, you know, the clerk said that they need, you know, I need a social security number. And I say, here, go use your brother's. And so they go register them with the same SSN. That becomes even worse when you are part of a culture that, for example, names your kids after particular saints on their days. So if you come from a very largely populated urban center, you have a bunch of kids who are all born on the same date, on the same day of the week, and they get the same saint names for their first name, and then they have a very common last name. So there's, you know, a lot of Jose Gonzalez, and they don't all have unique social security numbers either, or they don't have an SSN at all. So trying to distinguish all of these kids in a 9 million student database is a lot of excitement, a lot of fun. It's not a great identifier, and it's a really lousy authenticator, because an authenticator by its very nature is supposed to be secret. But what do? You have to give out your SSN as an identifier to prove, to say, I'm that Wendy Nather. I'm not the other one, I'm this one. Here's my SSN to prove it. So using something as both an identifier and an authenticator is a big, big design problem, because they're at odds with how they're supposed to be handled. But the problem is we don't have a good substitute, and I'm sure you all have some ideas about that. We certainly, you know, keep coming closer to the idea of a national ID, and then we run away again because we don't trust our government. It works great in Sweden because they trust their government. They've got a national ID. All sorts of, you know, very sophisticated things are handled for them online. But that is a problem, a cultural problem, as well as a political problem. Yes, sir?
Don't we have real ID? I mean, many, I guess about 11 states don't support real ID for those exact reasons, but many of us do have real ID.
Yeah, you're talking about the driver's license number? Yeah, yeah. That's the other thing too. If you are not going to drive, you'd better get an ID card that functions the same as a driver's license, because that's being used as another authenticator when the SSN is too widely spread.
Right, but there's a national standard called Real ID.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
Yeah, and I see the warning signs in the Austin airport that by this date, if you don't have Real ID, you're going to have to show a passport or something else.
So
Yeah.
how is that not a simultaneous identifier and an authenticator? It's still just a number.
It is still just a number, and it is being used as both, but the problem is that they should not be used for both purposes. Because again, an authenticator is supposed to be secret. Nobody should know it except you. It's supposed to be proof that you are who you say you are. But too many people know an SSN now. First of all, you've given it to everybody. You know, all sorts of companies have been collecting it for decades, and now they've been losing it for decades.
Yeah. Equifax just did it most recently.
Yeah, yeah.
Open source software.
So it's not going to be a good. It's not a good authenticator anymore. If it were only an identifier to tell you apart from other people, then it would be okay, except that it is also being used as an authenticator. So that's why everybody gets upset whenever an SSN a breach like this, like Equifax, happens, because fraudsters can use the SSN and your other demographic data as an authenticator, not just an identifier. Does that make sense? It's the difference between telling two people apart and one of them proving that he is who he says he is. And for that you need a shared secret. But the problem is the SSN is a shared secret that is now shared with
Everybody.
But should that be a
everybody.
shared secret, not with cryptography.
Yes, well that is, hopefully if we could work out something like that where the
Estonia did.
yes, Estonia did, they trust their government.
They do, actually.
Well, there are lots of places that don't trust their government that have national IDs.
For example, in
I mean, we trust our
Argentina?
government less than you, for sure.
Yeah, but how long have you had the national ID in Argentina?
Forever. I mean,
Forever.
for at least 45 years. I mean, more, probably 60.
Mm.
So did
Yeah,
that
at
help
other
or
times.
so did that help or hurt the Desparecido problem?
Well,
I mean,
you
that's
know,
actually a serious question.
You actually have an ID card that with photo ID that is unique and has several electronic like ways to avoid having it forged,
Yeah.
and that's asked everywhere.
Okay,
That's what
so
you present
physical
everywhere.
possession is your authenticator then,
Yeah,
because you're the only one who can.
and kind of like an informal check against your face, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And your thumbprint is also there.
Mhm. Okay, so that's another authenticator to go with the identifier. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
So we've also got the Aadhaar system in India.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't mean to derail your talk if you're gonna get to all these.
Oh, no, that's okay, we got time.
No, it's
No, I'm not
discussion
getting to these,
based, don't worry about it, we
yeah,
want you
is-
to ask
it is
questions.
discussion day,
Well,
yeah.
Again,
Absolutely.
secrets are important, that's how you authenticate, right? And for example, this thumbprint that you just mentioned, the fact that the government has the full thumbprint means it can be misused. All right, so for example, in designing systems like these phones with the thumbprint IDs, Apple and all of the people who do similar work very hard to make sure that thumbprint data never leaves the processor chip. Never gets stored in memory, can never be seen by anybody else. And that's a really important principle of authentication to get into this device that has all access to all your money and every secret in your life. And the fact that we give thumbprints across to the government, which they can then use in all sorts of ways, and we've seen a lot of questionable government activity in many governments, ours, the U.S. is included. But I really wouldn't want them to have my fingerprint data unless I've been a criminal. And I don't want it even then. But
Or you drive for Uber.
Or you've been in the military.
Or you
But that's still part of the fact that there are reasons that people do this. I mean, you don't have to give up your fingerprint to drive for Uber because you don't have to drive for Uber. No one has a gun to your head. The military is a different question. We need to be able to define it, to identify, unfortunately, lost service members. Right? That's a very different
Again, that's
question.
being used now as an identifier, not as an authenticator. In
Well,
other words, yeah, we want to pick out, this person named Wendy with this thumbprint, that's how we can tell that we have the right Wendy.
Well,
But
this
again,
is-
that's different from the proposition that you are the only one who can produce and create that thumbprint. But that's, the horses have left the barn for that in the U.S. because, as you said, the full fingerprint is being shared everywhere for identification, not for authentication. So yeah, we've been mixing these two use cases for quite some time, and it's gonna create a bigger problem. So getting back to my 18-year-old needed his own account, and he needed to authorize me. So, but what happened though was for his record with Walgreens, first of all, I knew his name, obviously. I knew his date of birth, exactly, I was there. I knew his address. But in the Walgreens record, they, so when, the procedure that they have is that they take them out of your family group in your Walgreens account when they're not a family member anymore, and you have to invite them, and they have to accept the invitation for you to manage their prescriptions. So what they do is they ask for the email address, which happened to be mine, because I had been managing his prescriptions all this time. So my email was on his record so that I could get notified when his prescriptions were ready. And then the other form of authentication, which is the phone number, you send them you send them an invitation. They send it to the email address, and if that person approves it, they have to get a code text to their phone of record, so that they can type it in and prove that yes, they really are the person who is accepting this invitation. So it happens that the phone number was my husband's phone number, because he also likes getting texts as to when the prescriptions are ready. So we didn't have to set up anything for him. Now, I could have gone to, I've had to do this before for other things. I could have just logged in, set up an account for him with a different email in case they checked, to make sure it wasn't a duplicate. And with another phone number, we got, several phones and everything. I could have done that, but I didn't even have to, because in his record was everything we needed to do the invitation and the authentication ourselves. So we didn't have to bother my son with it at all. He said, okay, yes, I accept. And I went to my husband, what's the code? Okay.
So in other words, you violated the whole point of the protocol.
Yes, I violated the whole point of the protocol.
And the legal requirements on drug access and all sorts of things.
Yeah, all
all
kinds of
because you believe you're still his parent.
Foolish. I know. It is crazy, but the thing is, they didn't even test their workflow to see if it could be evaded in this fashion. They didn't look at the existing record for his prescriptions and go, well, we would expect to see the email and number change now because he's independent and presumably managing his own affairs, but they didn't do any kind of checking like that. He still doesn't have a login on the Walgreens website. He doesn't need one. The other thing is that since all of his meds are getting auto-refilled, we actually didn't even have to change anything there because we kept getting texts that his new prescriptions were ready and we could go pick them up. So there was nothing that forced him to set up his own affairs and authorize us in any meaningful way. So this is the sort of workflow problem that we are getting into with delegation. And it gets even worse because here I'm going to talk about my experiences with my parents. So both of them declined on and off very slowly over years. And actually my father wrote one of the first Fortran compilers. He was very, he was into high tech before it was high and before it was tech, I guess. But he kind of stuck with DOS even into the 90s. He hated Windows, refused to use it. He finally accepted Linux grudgingly, but he was not all that technical. So as it turns out, it was a good thing that he didn't believe in security, because when he finally had a stroke, I had to break into his Gmail account, and he had cached the password, so that was pretty easy. And I could use his Gmail account to reset his banking passwords and everything else that I needed to do to pay the bills, because my mother had no way of accessing that stuff and didn't know how to do it. So I probably violated CFAA 2 in order to do this, but when something like this happens, first of all, he still didn't believe that he was incapacitated. My mother didn't believe she was incapacitated either, even though she had trouble really grasping the concept of the scroll bar. So all of the things that they had online, they could not manage anymore. So the other thing that I did when I took over their Gmail accounts so that I could manage their subscriptions and their New York Times stuff and their Amazon accounts and everything, so I added my email as an alternate address in Gmail. Now, does anybody here know what that does when you add your name as an alternate address in a Gmail account? Well, when you add an additional email address to the one that you have for Gmail.
It allows you to send from it on
Yeah.
behalf of your
Yeah.
original Gmail address.
Yeah, exactly. And I had intended that to be if you like, a rescue email address in case I couldn't get back into that account. But what happened was, as a result of that, any Gmail user who sent email to wendy@nather.com, Google said, "Oh, you mean Marilyn Nather," and put the name on there. So I got email from people who had no reason to know who my mother was, who only knew my personal email account. I'm on the board of directors for Securing Change, which is a nonprofit organization. I started getting email, to the board of directors list that was addressed to my mother at my email account. So why is this a problem? Why is this a privacy problem? Well, suppose Superman had done this. This is not necessarily something that you want to have being given out to anybody who knows your personal non-Gmail address, but you yourself are using Gmail. So it got even worse because somebody who was using Gmail when I was working for the Retail Intelligence Sharing and Analysis Center wanted to get in touch with me regarding a breach notification. And he didn't have my email address, but he didn't realize it. He was using Gmail on his phone, and he started typing in my name. And Gmail very happily said, "Oh, you mean wendy@nather.com." But then they appended my parents' private nickname for me. So I got this email from this person in the state of California addressed to my parents' private nickname for me. Now that's pretty creepy. It's even creepier when your parents have passed away. It's like super major creepy. And I, talked to a lot of people at Google, and they said, "Oh, well, you used the alternate email address the wrong way. It wasn't supposed to be, a rescue address." And I said, "Well, that's great, but can you, I took it down, but this is still happening." So somewhere these associations are still in Gmail with me and my parents and my name and my address that they can't seem to clean out.
I think it's more of a deliberate aspect because they're in the business of collecting information.
Could be. But I suspect this is an unintended consequence of the complexity of how they're trying to do all these relationship mapping so that they can't disentangle them even if they want to. I have no reason to believe that the Google people that I talked to, were trying to mess with me or anything like that. They were like, no, we're not really sure. It took a while for them to look into it and come back to me and everything. And part of this, was my bad, because I didn't exactly understand what I was doing or what the implications were when I did it. I was simply trying to manage my parents' account for them while changing as little as possible in case they wanted to step in and take the reins again.
Remember, that's a failure of Google, not you.
Well, it could be, it could be both. Some days I'm just not sure.
You call that a user experience problem.
Bingo! Yes! Exactly. So that's the other thing, is that if we are going to build these workflows for delegation, we need to be able to have in the design not just the, click here on the little information in the circle, the little I button, and it tells you how to do it. It should tell you what it means when you do it, what's going to happen, what the implications are when you do it. We cannot expect anymore that people will intuitively understand what we have built into our UXs for them. We have to be prepared to explain it to them. So here are some questions to think about if you need to do this for a loved one, if you need to temporarily manage something. If you were hit by a bus downstairs, who would pay your bills for you? I bet most of your stuff is online. Do you have any Amazon subscriptions of, Ivory soap that you need to turn off because, you're in the hospital and you won't be using that much soap for a while. You know, think of all of the affairs that you have that are digital in nature.
So this sounds like organizations, so Google has their G Suite, and they seem to have done a fairly okay job managing this at the organizational level. So you'll have your organization's Google identity, and then you have multiple administrators, and then the administrators can subtract people.
Yeah, it's great if you are working for an enterprise. If you are using Google Suite for personal reasons, right now I have like 5 or 6, I think, Google email addresses that I administer. Some of them are simply because I've wanted to keep certain parts of my life separate from other ones. I have to administer my parents' accounts, even though they're gone. I never know when somebody's going to email them out of the blue and ask them something, and I have to give them the bad news again. And then also for, I don't know, I was on the program committee for a conference that said, here, we set up a Gmail account for you. I said, oh, that's very nice. Now I have another one that I need to worry about. So when it starts getting that complicated, which identity is the right one for the purposes of whatever it is you're about to do?
And also this goes into at least how people are treating identities maybe going into the future, where it's more a pseudonymous type of relationship. I mean, you're conflating online identities with one-to-one with real-world identities, but that's not the way that people use the internet nowadays, or maybe in the past.
No, it certainly
You
isn't.
have your own multiple identities, and
yeah, there are very, very different. The identity, just knowing that somebody is attached to an identity is not enough, because you have to ask, why do we care that we know who they are? Do we care, you know, Wendy Nather, that's fine, but we care about the Wendy Nather who is a superintendent in Allen ISD.
We don't care, it's Google that cares, and they make their money 90-some% based on the fact that these identifications can be made and that they can solicit to you based on what they know about you.
Oh, but they can't. But the thing is that there are only a small set of groups that care whether I am a superintendent of an ISD, and that's the Texas Education Agency. Like, you might say, yes, I know absolutely who Kevin Welch is. Well, that's great, but we don't care unless he is in a role that we care about. And then we want somebody to vouch for the fact that he really is a superintendent. So many different roles and delegations, especially if you are moonlighting in different jobs. You might have the same name, you might have the same title, but you're working on behalf of 2 different organizations at separate times. And you have to know who you are representing at that given time. Insurance brokers have to do this too. So it's not enough to say, we've pinned down the identity. We have to explain why we care, and usually those are based on attributes, which relying parties will choose for their own reasons. We will believe that this Institute of Higher Ed is vouched for this person because we trust this Institute of Higher Ed. But, you know, just because they got, you know, a driver's license or 2 driver's licenses ago, we don't really care about that. We need this amount of fresh information on their role. We need it to be validated by a party that we can rely on. So there's a whole chain of things that go around an identity. And the thing is that if you are delegating for somebody, you know, you may say, I am going, you know, I'm on vacation this week and Kevin's taken over my job today. And do I want him to log in as me to do the tasks that I need to do? Or do we want him doing it under his own name where we can track it and say, these are the steps that he took, which were, you know, which were allowed, which were sanctioned, but we need to make sure that it was really you who was doing it instead of me.
I almost wonder if there isn't maybe some system that could be developed of like that you have sort of duty authorization tokens you can issue to an identity like me, and then anything I do as you that requires this action that can only be performed by you, I have to supply that token, and it'll leave a record of, yes, I did it, but acting in Wendy Nather's delegation chain behalf.
PGP with non-repudiation.
Yeah, although the fact that even Phil Zimmerman doesn't want to use PGP anymore is a problem.
I'll point out, like, you shared the article where PGP was like listed great on security, but horrible in usability.
Who uses PGP?
I use it,
Kind
but
of.
I like,
I
there's
have
a reason.
used
Well,
it.
it's still horrible on usability.
Yeah, there's-
Always
How many
is
decades has it
been
The
been?
horrible.
adoption has always been the issue.
Because it's impossible to use for
Yes.
like any
Right.
normal person.
Yeah, I couldn't even get a decent key pair out of Microsoft's threat intelligence group.
I mean, the thing that's always stopped me is like, I never know if the thing I'm using to generate my key is actually making a secure key or not, because it's so obtuse.
Yeah.
Well, and the NSA has injected algorithms
And
that are
yeah.
default that are not exactly sound in the sense that you can find duplicate hashes and stuff like that for.
Which is why you just need to randomly think of a number.
Might be better off.
Might be.
Yeah, my youngest the other day said, "Mom, think of a number." I said, "Okay." And she said she guessed all of them, 1 through 10. I said, "No, it's none of them." She said, "Well, what did you think of?" I said, 55. She said, "No, you're supposed to think of." I said, "You didn't say between 1 and 10." She said, "Okay, now between 1 and 10." I said, "Okay." She guessed all of them. They weren't any of them. "Mom," I said, "I thought of 1.5. "Mom, no." So yes, all of these can be UX problems. So if you are going to delegate your online affairs to somebody, first of all, do you want them to use your login or theirs? Or do you use both? Do I log in as my parent or do I log in as me? When I, luckily during a clear period where my mom was, pretty with it, she was able to get me set up with a durable power of attorney so that I could use my own banking login, but administer her accounts from my banking login. It was easier, though, for me to do it from her login, and I also knew her. I also had her password because I had her Gmail account and I could reset it. At one point, I had to write a bunch of checks, and then from my own account, and then reimburse myself from hers. And I did them in the amount of each individual check because I wanted to keep track of which checks I had written the amounts for and then gotten the reimbursement from. But that triggered a fraud alert. And the bank said, "Oh, no." And they shut down my mother's account. And they said, she needs to come in with a form of ID. First of all, her driver's license had expired a long time ago. Secondly, she was not mobile enough to get her out of the house to a banking thing. So luckily, I still had my account, so I just logged into my account and finished, doing stuff. Yeah.
So this delegation problem you're talking about is actually a disability problem.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have a lot of standards in the web, for example, the ARIA standards are all about user experience. Is where you're going, where we need to actually change the rules of disability, because when people can no longer actually manage their affairs digitally, we need to have some mechanism that servers like Gmail, like Yahoo, whomever, can support delegation
Well,
as part
it
of the
depends.
ADA rules.
Is a minor disabled by definition?
Yes, they have no legal rights to speak of.
Well, that's not the same as being disabled.
They can't execute contracts, they can't be full
Okay,
participants,
so
they are
legally, they are,
disabled.
they're not empowered.
They can execute contracts outside the United States.
Yeah?
I mean, we're thinking globally.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. No, that's true. No, that's where we need to get to, because right now, just about the only delegation that we are doing is for the enterprise. I go on vacation, Kevin takes my place. For that, there are fire call things for that. There's some delegation there, but not consistently for consumers. And again, if they don't believe that they are disabled, if there's a possibility that they could become capable again and log into their own accounts, do you try to remember their passwords, or do you change them so that they can't get back in? Is that the equivalent of taking the car keys away from them? Do you reset the security challenge questions that they have on their account? It's a good thing I remembered my dad's first pet. My kids do not know the name of my first pet.
So-
I'm not even sure I can define my first pet.
The University of Texas just recently implemented a system where you can add on people who would need information to this,
Mhm.
and they have their own login, their own password,
That's
and their
great.
own access.
Uh-huh.
But I think that their system is a little more advanced than most.
Well, this is probably a little more challenging in like the fact that your parents use email. My mother's still kind of a little bit, I mean, she's not, so, I mean, she probably should know more about email than she does, but like she's not incredibly savvy with it. But I remember when we went through this process with my great grandfather, we had to take him to court and basically sue him to prove that he was unfit to take care of himself.
God, isn't that horrible?
Yeah, he was an ornery old fart. but-
Well, I'm sure, but still, that is,
Yeah.
that can destroy relationships, and you definitely don't want to do that if you can avoid it, but.
Whiskey helped whenever
If
we
you
got in the
remember.
nursing home. That helped improve the relationship.
Yeah, I'll bet it did. The other problem, though, is you do not have to be incapacitated in any legal sense to be unable to work email.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no reason why, there's no test at this point. So that if you can't, run your email inbox, then you're not capable of handling your affairs. And yet, that is where we are getting, because especially if the only way to pay a bill is online, or that's the only way to do it if you're immobile and you can't go to
A lot of it's
go to
just
an
barrier
office.
of adoption, though.
Mhm.
You have like the oldest people in society who didn't grow up with this, and they do not want to adopt it.
Well, or they do want to adopt it, but they're just not good at it. They're really, really not good at it.
Yeah, I would say they have also a threshold beyond which you
Yeah.
can't push.
Yeah.
So I did this recently for my parents. They're both fully capable, and they're not to that point where they need assistance, but because I work in tech, they ask me questions, and of course I'm sure everybody has that experience. But I had to set them up for finally getting 2FA on Google accounts and having those be the only accounts that could reset their banking passwords and getting
Yeah.
some baseline security. I could get there, but getting to a password manager or getting past a certain point, that's not going to work. Like that was just
Yeah.
too much. Like that it would recoil from that. So like maybe I could reintroduce that next year or something once they're comfortable, but I couldn't go past. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't set them up in a way that my job can compel me to, and still maintain their interest in getting there.
Yeah. There is a threshold for everybody. I've been in tech now for 30 years, and I've gotten to the point where it just pisses me off anytime there's a UI change, especially a gratuitous one. I'm using a SaaS application, and in the morning the thing is on one side, in the afternoon it's on the other side. And for crying out loud, that was just over there. Why?
Or
Why
how
did
about
you do
Windows
this?
7 to Windows 8?
Yeah. Any of these, but even the smallest thing just really, really tick me off.
Just Facebook every 6 months. I just learned your bad UI, and now you've changed it
Yeah,
again.
exactly. So that cognitive load on all of us is really too much more, or much more than somebody who is, not grown up. And then, like I said, my father, was in this field much earlier than I was. And still, it was too hard for him to go past a certain point, as he said. So, does this make them incapable? No, it doesn't, but it means that we need to adapt our,
So what's the solution?
We teach everybody the console.
oh God.
After that.
But no, we can't teach
Millions of people trapped. Oh, is it a hurricane? No, they couldn't exit VI.
We can't teach everyone the
There's no
console,
more-
but
there's no-
everyone can get all the newspapers for free.
I mean, I can't be the only one who loaded up VI the first time, couldn't figure out how to get out of it, and Controlled Z and then killed it.
Actually, that's the #1 question on Stack Overflow. They did an article on it.
Yeah.
Well, and their first mistake is they should have been using Emacs.
Yeah.
You know what,
I used Emacs before that, but sometimes when you're editing system files, the default editor is VI, and all of a sudden you find yourself in VI.
Well, at least then use them if you have to do that to yourself.
I agree.
That's how religious do
So anyway, so what's, you know, what do you do with the delegation today? For 2FA, if you've got Duo on your phone, which I hope you do, you know, and you are 1,000 miles away from your parent, do you switch the 2FA to your phone? Do you ask them to send them their phone? They don't want to get rid of their phone.
Why do you need are you talking about the SMS based?
Either SMS or the Duo app. If you are switching it, you at least have to.
Are you talking about the rolling codes type stuff?
No. There's yeah, it's a push based authentication app.
Yeah, the one that
I'll show it to you
It's
later.
definitely a problem with my mom.
But the problem is usually the assumption is that you only have one of these. And if you were going to do part-time administration for somebody else, how do you do that? When the assumption is that physically it was supposed to be something you have, something you know, and something you have. What if you don't know it, and what if you don't have it? Or what if only one person can have it at the same time? When I was working for TEA, again, the school districts would treat their accounts on our systems as a role, not as an individual account. So they would say, it's your turn to report into TEA, here's the login, here's the password, you go do it. So giving them a token is not going to fix that. They will just hand over the token too. So there are a lot of things that we need to figure out. And the other thing is that, again, if you are doing something online as a delegate of somebody else, are you using the equivalent of a durable power of attorney? And by the way, one handy point here is that, at least in Texas, there are two different ways that durable power of attorney can go into effect. That's upon incapacitation or with immediate effect. And you may have your own opinions on this, but I did this with my parents, and I really recommend it. Make it immediate effect.
Can you define durable power of attorney?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I thought everybody was an attorney in here.
Not all of us.
Yes, the durable power of attorney is a legal document that allows you to carry out financial transactions and other legal
So it's just a
things.
power of attorney?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I thought that was
On
different
behalf
from
of-
power of attorney.
And they can specify which kinds of transactions, like you can't make any gifts, so they're assets without them, but you can
It's more
sign
powerful.
documents.
It's a more powerful form.
Isn't it durable non-revocable? Because a regular power of attorney is completely revocable. They decide, I want you to take care of it one day, and then tomorrow they say, they can take it back. They can.
Oh, no, they can revoke a
A
durable.
durable, they can, okay.
Is it a higher threshold to revoke durable, or?
Don't remember because we never did any revocation, but,
How would you know if
It's a legal
if you came
document,
up with
that's
a
all
new
I need to
one,
know.
if you signed a new one, that,
sense of security over here?
yeah, it is
There's no
difficult.
information about the revocation, so you can actually continue to use it.
Is there like
Yeah,
a-
there's no certificate revocation.
We just need a blockchain to keep track of it all.
Yes,
I like
you need
that.
Everything, there's gotta be a blockchain. But
I mean,
that's,
with the durable power of attorney, is that, I can't forget, is that court approved? If so, then.
No, you can.
No,
print it
it's
out.
not
You
court
can print it out
approved.
from the internet, they just sign it.
For a
yeah,
durable power?
yeah, you just
Yeah.
download it, you have to have it witnessed.
Sorry.
But, yeah.
Yeah, you notarize
Power of
it.
attorney.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Durable power of attorney
spread
is not valid if you're incapacitated or unable to make decisions for yourself. The durable one is still valid whether or not you're incapacitated.
Okay.
Say that again.
There was some way we could look.
This actually springboards a little bit of a question I had in there, which is, how much can one just adapt methods of identification and delegation from the real world into the digital world? I mean, we've had problems with identity for a long time. People have been committing fraud since the dawn of civilization, So like, is there a fundamental reason that the digital space is a harder problem than the physical space in these issues?
Yeah, because in the physical space, you presumably can, get somebody to show up. Whereas, if you're in Romania, you can do things remotely, and if it's all online, just about everything that we've come up with so far has been.
Just go ask Equifax for your
Yeah.
Social Security.
Well, that was more a I knew answer. I just
Yeah.
wanted
Yeah,
to
yeah.
have it said for the record.
But yes, but if you do have a durable power of attorney, I strongly urge you to consider to do it with immediate effect, rather than having to declare your loved one incapacitated in order for it to have effect.
What does that mean?
You have to go to court and prove that your loved one cannot manage their affairs anymore. And that is a horrible thing to have to do to somebody, especially if they don't believe it. All you wanted to do was help them. If you get one with immediate effect, you can take it around to the bank and everything, and they'll go, okay, great, we'll get you a signature card for your parents' bank account, we'll get you, they will cooperate and give you what you need to be able to do it, and you can do it any time that you need to. So you can just say to your mom, you look tired, you want me to just log in and take care of this for you? And she'll say, oh yes, thank you. I did that for years for both of my parents. There was no talk of, you can't do this anymore, Dad, I'm going to do it. You don't want to have that conversation. You want to just be, look, I can already legally do this. Do you want me to just take care of this one thing for you? So whenever I was, signing them into nursing homes, I would sign all the papers for them because I could. I had the durable power of attorney right there. Just all the things that were too exhausting for them to do, or they really couldn't, they really weren't, in a position to be able to understand it, or they were ill, they were delirious. There are a lot of reasons why somebody can't, manage their affairs at any given time. So it's a lot easier if you just do it with immediate effect. Now, I did this also for my husband and gave him a durable power of attorney for me. And my attorney said, you sure you want to do this? And I said, well, if I trust him to do it then, I trust him to do it now. If I were hit by a bus tomorrow, I've got like 200 or 300 online accounts. I have no idea how many accounts I have anymore. But he could find all of them and he could do them. And if anybody asked him anything, he could immediately fax over the durable power of attorney and say, yes, I need access to this, give it to me now. Whereas getting something like this drawn up and having to prove first that they will never be able to take care of their affairs again because they're incapacitated, it's a very difficult choice. The other thing with online delegation is sometimes you can set it up online, but in one case I remember to revoke it, they wanted it revoked in writing. So it's like I could set up the delegation myself. What if I'd done it fraudulently? If my mother had wanted to revoke it, she would have had to write a letter and send it in. That doesn't make any sense. So there are a lot of problems we have today with the design of workflows for this sort of thing. Now some apps, you mentioned for UT, that's great that they're doing that. LastPass and other ones are now allowing you to share passwords or give somebody the equivalent of a fire call access so that somebody can request access if you've already given to them and you have a certain amount of time to say no before they get it. So let's say you are lying under the bus and they need access to your things. But the thing is, they assume that you're just going to log in as them. So again, you're going to run into the possible fraud triggers, depending on what kind of analytics they have going, user behavioral analytics or whatever. If my husband does something very different from me, well, we're an interfaith household, we have VI and Emacs. But if he was doing something substantially different from me while using my account, they might lock him out, and me, when I come out from under the anesthetic. So this is not a full solution to the problem, because there's always going to be this conflict between companies wanting to determine, that it's the right person using that account, but without supporting delegation to really allow it to happen. And again, if I log in to my parents' account, I will look just like them, and if it comes down to any forensics later, they'll say, well, Wendy logged in from this IP at this time, and if it was my mother's computer, there's nobody to say that it wasn't her. So this is something else that we need to work on. So real world world implications are of the access that they're getting or being granted or what they're using, and explain to them, especially when it comes to particular features of a system, if you choose this, this is what, this is how we're going to treat you after this. We're going to assume that you have this and this and this in place. This is what's going to happen. We need more explanation around that. We need to standardize these delegation paths. If UT has a great way of doing this delegation, that would be great if we could standardize on that. And if you went to every company, to Amazon, to Best Buy, to your bank, to your health insurance, and you wanted to set up a delegation across the board for all of your accounts to one person, wouldn't it be nice if it were the same workflow each time so you knew how to do it? Right now, it takes an incredible amount of time, assuming they supported it all. Lots of phone calls, lots of faxing, lots of explaining, where was that thing again? Where do I turn that on? Does that give me everything? Well, no.
It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of incentive for companies to do that, I guess, in the banking industry legally, because they have to deal with it for everybody at some point usually, or not everybody, but sometimes my mom had similar problems with my grandparents and that sort of thing. So, but I don't know that, how do you incentivize whatever companies that don't necessarily have that need?
One way we could do it is that we could do it under the guise of fraud prevention, because we can say if your customers have a very clear standardized way of delegating somebody, so you know they're a delegate and you know them before they have to use it, then you're less in danger of either accidentally locking them out for fraud, which tends to lose you customers. And also, you can better tune your behavioral analytics to detect fraud. But then again, the other problem is if you have two logins, one delegated and one not, you just doubled the attack surface of that account. So if I choose a really stupid password for my delegated account, that's another way for a criminal to come in. So that's also not a 100% thing. That's why I'm asking you guys to help out with this.
You should really look at that blog post I published.
Yeah.
It's talking about a lot of these. The main thing was reclaiming an identity if you've lost a key, or if you are, or if there's a fraud involved and it's lost. And basically, it's a threshold of multiple friends or family or coworkers that basically all come together, and once it gets above a certain threshold, the system believes that to update the key so that it's the new person.
Also a certificate of revocation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that's great if all of your friends are online. Most of my parents' generation, you'd have to call them on the phone and explain to them what you wanted, and they might not. It might take a really long time for them to all come together to make that happen.
We're talking about back end stuff and front end stuff. So there are things that are possible on the back end, but are difficult to convey. PGP we're just talking about.
I've seen when a lot of apps have user impersonation stuff built in, but usually it's for support people or people that work at the company to be able to see what. We just don't expose that stuff to customers, but a lot of the infrastructure for the UI and UX elements built in are already built out just so that support people or people that are at the company have access to see what users see when, in their particular circumstances. It would just be a matter of exposing that to customers.
Assuming somebody's laptop still works, which was never the case with my mother. God, what did you do, Mom? I don't know. It's just not working. All right, I'll come over. Yeah, there are all sorts of hitches to this, but I think we need to build a robust system with a bunch of alternatives to be able to support this really needed function, because we're going to need it more and more.
Well, again, I'm going to suggest, because I've been peripherally involved with the disability community, is that The ADA is actually a very effective law that forces people to change their systems.
Yes, good point.
And so these older people that we're talking about who are getting durable powers of attorney, et cetera, these are disability statements that are actually you're making, other than the example of your child. Okay, though I argue that legally he's disabled until he becomes an adult. And that's probably easier than trying to actually get incentive systems aligned or to get some major other standard going through the process. There's already a standards process with the disability community that's well regarded. I would actually be surprised if the aging community is not already engaged, because that's infrequently regarded as a disability also.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to know that too. I haven't run across any efforts in there, but if there are any, I would love to hear about it. But yeah, it's really from cradle to grave. People are going to be living digital lives from their very first, Facebook baby photo to, on a spectrum to, after they pass away and they have digital assets that need to be handed down.
My 4-year-old niece has a iPhone. I was 17 when I had my first one.
Yeah.
I wonder if you've looked at gene reading technology. So each of us, I think, have about 100 what are called de novo mutations at birth. These are sequenceable, and now it's relatively inexpensive. It gets cheaper every year to have microprocessors that read DNA. So this went from being very super cutting edge to now just being cutting edge. So that's when you have in a crime lab to do a very expensive gene reading, and now is the equivalent technology for doing paternity tests.
Right.
This stuff's getting real cheap and real fast. Have you looked at both this as a sort of as an opportunity as well as a potential danger for authentication?
I haven't, because again, because for delegation it's different. You have to go through the whole workflow saying, I want to delegate my authority to this person. I want it to be legally, airtight, and whatever hoops you have to jump through with somebody who's disabled to get that done. And then, having established these two people with their DNA, then it could be easier, you're right, to just say, okay, both of you spit in these little containers on the same laptop, and
so, but I guess if you come back to like standard delegation paths, though, if we start setting like centralized standards, especially by things like laws, what if the laws can't keep up with the technology? What if whoever makes the laws say, well, you have to do it with two-factor authentication, but then this like spit cup technology comes along, and
Yeah.
you like that one better.
That's the new two-factor spit cup technology.
I mean, you see that problem a lot in general, that laws and tech can't keep up with each other. It's not unique to this domain at all.
All I can say is, having watched the disability community, they don't have common coverage over every platform. And the browser technology called ARIA and the stuff that's built into your phones are very different in how they work. But they both meet the letter of the law of the ADA. Otherwise, Apple wouldn't be selling these, and Google wouldn't, and Samsung would. So there are ways to solve this problem in a regulatory fashion that allows evolution, or we've been seeing it happen. That doesn't mean it will happen in the modern legislative community, but it can be done.
Yeah. And then the bridges between the physical and the digital worlds. Again, also for disabled people who can't go someplace, or again, if you are minimally capable of doing some things online but not other things online, where do you get the help for that? And it may not map to a physical disability, it may not map to a mental disability, it just is what it is. It's either our failure in terms of designing something too complex for normal people to use, or it's another function of we've built something so complex that people after a certain point the cognitive load is too much and they can't use it, and yet it is how we manage our affairs to a large extent online today. So, how can we bridge those two domains better than we're doing right now? You got an answer, Ken?
Not for a soundbite.
Not for a soundbite, okay. So let me just wrap up here. I would just urge you to plan for this so that it doesn't take you by surprise, but don't lose your identity when you do it.
Well, if cryptocurrencies ever take off, there's Trevo.
What's a Trezor?
Trezor, the hard
Trezor.
wallet.
Trezor?
Yeah, Trezor, I bet. Which kind of does it just for financial, but nothing for else.
Yeah, because that's a pretty well-defined use case, but for all the other use cases we have in life, for selling things, for, giving permission for medical treatments, for,
Well, we've made some gains in that too, between DocuSign and Adobe Sign, which was I forgot who they bought it from, but they bought it from a different company that was successful, and they're supposed to be legally binding, electronically signed documents.
Yeah, I mean, I know at least whatever Adobe has baked into PDFs now is at least from having been in a AD group domain where like it actually enabled some of it, I can say it's at least annoying enough that you would have to hack it to get around it. It's at least a base level of security where it insists you've generated a key and you've signed this and said it's you.
But with DocuSign and things like that, it's apparently legally binding because you control the email address. So there's no cryptography.
I'm not as familiar with DocuSign as I am with DocuSign, which is what Adobe bought.
Okay.
But with that one, you can sign it with a key. You can sign it like with your hand signature, or you can print it out and fax it back to them.
It probably depends on the.
DocuSign, when I used it, was like you logged into a service and it was authenticated via email, but it was good enough for the mortgage people.
Might not hold up its court.
Oh, I think it would.
I mean, how many times have you had to get something notarized recently? I'm really good friends with the UPS folks because they have a notary public there.
It seems less nowadays than it was.
Okay.
I mean, I had a situation a few years back where I might have had to sue my apartment to get my deposit back. And I talked to a lawyer about it, and he said, oh, because you emailed them like 20 times about your deposit, and you put all this like legally, you cited the laws that they were breaking by not sending your deposit back. Like, they know, and they responded to these emails, so yes, we can use this to sue them, even though the recommended method is to send them a certified letter or whatever.
Yeah, you can do a lot of creative things with email. I remember somebody wanted to file a grievance process against the state because they were not able to file something by a deadline, and we proved that because we kept every bounced email that we received, we could prove that we had good reason to believe that they did receive the email because we did not get a bounce. And so that's, what tipped the scales there.
That's got to keep some storage.
Yeah. That's, there are all sorts of things that are being forged out here right now. I'm just saying that this is one that we should all be thinking about as our digital lives get bigger and bigger and as they start younger and younger. My oldest actually started his digital life around the age of 4 when we caught him in the middle of downloading and installing a browser plugin. He couldn't read yet, but he figured out that when a pop-up came in the middle of him trying to do something, there would be 2 boxes. One of them would be outlined darker than the other one. That was the default choice. And if he clicked on that one, it would make it go away and he could get back to what he was doing. So he went all the way through, the process of starting to download and install plugin, and he got stuck on the EULA panel because there was no default choice highlighted. At that point, he didn't know what to do. So that's where we found it.
He's probably also making end-user IT support their nightmare case.
Yeah, or it's something, but kids figure this out. They figure out how to make the system work in ways that we don't necessarily understand. But we have, a lot of people have different neurotypes, and we're going to have to be able to design better for all of them, not just the ones that happen to be our age and, you know, have grown up in the digital age. My kids are really annoyed that my husband and I know more about tech than they do, because we're not supposed to, we're parents. I said, honey, who do you think built the internet? So, you know, this is, yeah, we have been designing everything for one neurotype, and we've got to broaden that a lot.
Yeah, and actually, I think just sort of maybe as a wrap up here, it seems I would be remiss without asking that when I first scheduled you to speak, had no idea that a few days before we would have the Equifax hack, and I would think it would be interesting to conclude with your thoughts on how this relates to your talk, specifically, what do we do now, both to safeguard our identities, especially when we don't know if we can trust Equifax, and also, like, politically, what needs to happen now? I mean, just this is literally the problem of identity you're talking here, writ large, causing massive legal and financial ramifications.
So I'm also kind of curious is how many people have signed away their rights to a class action lawsuit to find out whether or not they were hacked?
That's no longer true. The New York Attorney General made a take that.
Oh,
Yeah.
because I didn't when I saw that.
Yeah, no, I didn't either when I saw that.
I haven't even logged in there yet, because I already have a credit monitoring thing, so, and a credit freeze. But yeah, I mean, again, it's the problem of the identity being also used as an authenticator. If we would stop doing that, we wouldn't have this problem. I mean, I hate to say it, but my guess is, you know, that type of information from Equifax that was breached has probably already been lost over the last 10 years several times over. I don't think this is any
where the breach wasn't detected.
Oh no, where it was or it wasn't,
Yeah,
you know.
anybody shop at Target?
You know, OPM, you know, and any doctor's office, if you happen to have given them your social security number,
Pieces of your
IRS.
credit history are floating in the web everywhere,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Several universities have
Yes,
given up
universities too.
everybody's social security number.
Yeah. So I would be really, really surprised if you took all of the public breaches that we know about and you added up all of the supposed victims whose data was shared. I'm sure you would find, you know, like 5 times the number of people in the United States. I'm sure we've been breached many, many times over. And so yes, there's going to be, well, I was going to say there are plenty of people who are chasing down any folks on the dark web who are trying to sell this information if it isn't already out there. There are plenty of organizations that know how to check to see if somebody is testing the validity of that data somewhere. So there are a lot of other things, other countermeasures that are going on under the covers that nobody's going to talk about, but that I do know are going on.
I'd imagine that if I was trying to sell such data on the dark web, I'd actually be very paranoid and be like, how do I know what's not a honeypot? How do I actually sell this?
No, exactly. I mean, I know people who maintain presences on those, you know, on those sites, and so a good number of them, you know, are probably similar law enforcement and researchers who just don't realize they're talking to each other. Sometimes they figure it out, sometimes they don't. But you know, it's that, you know, they're very muddy waters there because of there is so much activity tracking down these criminals.
I
So
mean,
that makes
it's
it hard.
used for other things other than criminal activity, but
Yeah, I mean yeah.
Well, it's like BitTorrent. It has legit uses, but, you know.
well, Tor was invented by Naval Intelligence Services in order to allow people in communist countries to be able to communicate on the web.
Right, which is breaking their laws.
Yes.
There's a lot of reason to use a browser that's like way slower than normal browsers.
I would say is in terms of financial transactions, if you're not already watching your credit card transactions, and if you don't already have a credit freeze in place, you should.
Yeah, definitely.
Just as a matter of principle. Also, if you have children, check to see if they have a credit history. They should not. If they have a credit history, somebody may have tried to steal their identity.
What if it's really good?
They've made every payment that was due. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, those are the things, but those would be the same advice no matter how big or how small the breach is. I would say statistically speaking, you're much more at risk from a skimmer at a gas station or an ATM than you are, from this.
The sad part of that story with children is most of the time it's their parents that do it. Their credit goes bad and they put credit cards in their children's name. Yeah.
But I guess the skimmer is much more of a likely risk because there's a small data set and the people who all get got by that scammer will use them, while as 44% of the U.S. population, it's still maybe not huge odds you'll be one of the people who actually get scammed with a stolen data set.
Yeah, I mean, my husband used his ATM card exactly once in a year at one ATM, which happened to have a skimmer on it, as it turns out. And about 8 months later, we got a call from our bank. Usually the banks are picking this up first before you are, and saying somebody just tried to withdraw $800 from Brooklyn. Well, I'll put my husband on the phone, and this is a landline, and we're in Austin. They're like, okay, yeah, you've made your point. Okay, well, So, but one time is all it takes in those cases. So, yeah, it's hard to say. Anyway, I give up at this point.
Are there any organizations like governmental or others who are working on similar problems that you are trying to use their procedures and kind of commoditize them for the general market? I'm wondering, like HashiCorp Vault, they use something which ties in with your database, which is based on role-based access controls. It's not based on individual identity and all that. And they have rotating tokens. But what I'm thinking is is there something which can be taken from outside of that enterprise or government or military, very controlled environment, and I don't know, you could sell that to a bank or something and say that use our solution.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have, when I've done this talk before, I've suggested that what we really need is a digital concierge service where, somebody say, okay, you want to do this online and you want it to legally support this case and this case and this case. Okay, this is how you should set it up.
So then the question is, how much do you want to pay for that?
Yeah.
Because you are in the heart of entrepreneurship. There are people in this building that will go build that system if you're willing to pay for it.
But it'll be people heavy though, because you will be talking to people with different levels of understanding who want to do this. And actually somebody from one of the UK banks came to me and said, if we were to set something like that up, because they already do some sort of adjacent services for their customers. I don't know. I mean, do we trust a private sector organization more than we trust the government? Do we trust a consortium more than we trust, one agile organization?
Speaking for myself, I would never trust a bank to mess with my identity for other accounts.
Yeah, or they may not do it for you, but they may advise you on how to do it.
I trust Google because that's mostly what they do, is manage your identity. To sell to advertisers, but, at least I know that. I've made a deal with them to trade my identity.
A deal with the devil?
I don't
know. I mean, I brought this up
Facebook.
to other people, including the Department of Commerce,
The trust identity framework?
not the trust identity framework, but one of the folks who was in the NAI, what is it? I can't remember the initials, but anyway, because I think this would be a multidisciplinary effort to bring this together, and it's a societal problem. It's it's not just a problem that we should fix for the people who can afford the solution.
How many millions would you need to build this system?
5. I don't know, it works with VCs.
Billions of millions.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's a new form of credit that's emerging.
Mm-hmm.
Something called an ICO.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you're getting credit to build a project, and you're basically collecting money in order to build a system.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not proposing to lead this because I have a day job. But I thought with so many smart people in the room, somebody would have some good ideas, and I've heard some good ones already.
It does occasionally work with this group. Projects do occasionally spin off.
Yeah. So I'll hand this back to you, Kevin.
Yeah, I guess anybody else have any final questions before we wrap things up and share it?
It would be kind of cool if you took whatever documents were signed and then vault them online and blockchain them. So there's an on-ramp to get access to them. Because it occurs to me, like, if people die, like the people that are supposedly, like you sign your document over to somebody allowing them to access all your stuff, and then they die. Like, how do we get out? Okay, what happens? Like, the parents are disabled and the son died.
Yeah.
What happens to the lawyer? How do they get? Do they even know, like, what documents are signed, or they
Usually, or at least my attorney keeps copies of all of those, or keeps the originals, and I keep copies.
It's like assuming you already have a lawyer
The
system.
dead man switch. There was I saw this recently. It was like how to manage your Bitcoin if you die. Like, there would be like a dead man switch that could like send your key if you don't like respond to an email that you receive or something on a regular basis.
Unless you push this button every X minutes, self-destruct.
Or it's baked into the protocol, where you've got multi-sig. So for if the money
There's
moves
just
every
a lot
so
of
often,
security questions about multi-sig, especially with the failure on a Ethereum recently.
Yeah, we get in a bad car accident and you're in a coma for a while, and you don't push your dead man switch, and somebody steals all your Bitcoin.
well, it's not that. So it'd be multiple loved ones that would need to collaborate in order to move that money after a period of time.
Yeah.
Or maybe the secondary key doesn't work until you hit the dead man switch. Like you don't hit the dead man switch, and then it goes to multi-factor.
Yeah, and that just turns into yet another type of estate squabble, which I've also lived
I
through.
was wondering if there needs to be one extra channel. By the way, I'm not in favor of government in any way, but this might be a case where handing over some extra channel to the government would be interesting, because the final dispute resolution is the court system. So they decide, okay, there's no one left, everyone died in the plane crash, so we're going to push this button, and then there's a channel into the blockchain system that trips and then assigns to somebody else. So otherwise, you end up in one of those squabbles.
So I actually last year participated in a blockchain hackathon, and so the premise of the project that we were proposing was actually quite similar to what you're talking about. The guy who came up with it, he was like a developer at Athena, who deals with health records. And one of the things he pointed out was that when he took his newborn home, he essentially had to he had to pretend that he was the newborn to access their records.
Great signature.
Right? And so what he wanted to do was put authentication, sort of have like OAuth in the blockchain. So where you have a blockchain that's like permission, maybe managed by like a consortium of hospitals. In the case of health-related stuff. So births, deaths, incapacitations, and you could potentially get other organizations involved, like the law, right? You could have like the court system have a channel into whatever this blockchain is, and then have like sort of like I think with Ethereum they've got like the oracles or to do the smart contract stuff. So if something changes, if the state changes of somebody dying, and it's authentic, and the government, like let's say a court, officially rules that this person's dead, then that state change actually will cause whoever's next in the line to have control of the power of attorney or whatever.
Yeah,
but so it's sort of an interesting. I think you're onto something, and we sort of proposed that.
You can almost like extend that by saying, besides getting access to credentials, people are now investing, or whatever you want to call it, speculating in a lot of cryptocurrencies. those could be put in a vault as well, and some kind of same channels could be there, so if everyone dies, what happens to those with the estate?
Yeah, when the state issues a death certificate, there are a lot of automatic things that are set in motion, like notification of Social Security.
Exactly. So if you could somehow link that into a public, like a blockchain that's, people have private keys and, and there's all sorts of issues with that. But, but still, if you have like more authentication channels, that might be one way of like getting around some of this delegation stuff.
So when your baby, comes of age, do you do the handing over of the keys?
You set a rule. So you set a rule at 16 or whatever the jurisdiction that is applicable. Whenever the state change happens, they turn 16, they turn 18, then they're in charge of. Then that permission that you've granted to your parents, which is automatic on birth, gets removed.
So an email goes to twinkletoes@gmail.com or darkraver or whatever email they're using at the time, becomes their identity on which more is hanging legally and financially all the time.
It would be a cryptographic identity. It wouldn't be trusting a third party.
So where do you keep the cryptographic identity?
Well, that's a hardware problem.
Where did I put that?
That's a
It's been 18 years. Where did I put it?
1.6 million blockchain that he threw away that hard drive.
But we were talking about the Trezor. So for a lot of these things, if you wanted to recover your Trezor, one of the ways is
What is a Trezor, please?
Yeah, what is that?
It's a device that contains all of your cryptographic private keys, so you can create transactions on blockchains.
and
It's like a hardware
separated from
wallet.
the.
It's like a little device that you would plug into.
It's like a YubiKey, except more.
It's like a YubiKey.
Yeah.
Except studlier.
So allow me to suggest that this conversation continue over beers.
That might be a good idea. I was even going to say that the thing I couldn't remember at the beginning is that as we've been doing for the last several months, we will be adjourning to Firehouse Hostel and Lounge for drinks. Any of you who are free are welcome to join us because this has been quite stimulating, and I think we could all probably keep going for another couple hours probably. So I want to thank Wendy very much for a very interesting talk. I hope to see as many of you there as possible. Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.
I've got it, yes.
Wyatt,
I kind of got some fun, so.
Yeah.
What's going on? Kevin, I'm Drew. Nice to meet you, Drew. Yes, that is the plan. Firehouse Hostel Lounge. I will direct people when we all get on. It's basically if you walk down Brazos towards 6th Street, it will be on your left if you are like between 7th and 6th on Brazos. If you're walking down here, it's like a block. Okay. Because it's one of them runs the closest bar, and it's not. It's way classier than the 6th Street bar. Oh yes. You know where it is. Yes. You know yes, it's that one exactly. So yeah, you can always use it. I mean, I'm going to be leading everybody. It's basically, if you walk down Brazos towards 6th Street, it's between 7th and 6th on your left. Yeah. But you can shoot if you want to find it. It's not that much fun, but I'll be down in a minute.
No, I was intended to be
a little bit.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, fun.
I'm a legislature here.
Oh, okay.
I'm just kind of like listening to her about data and online privacy legislation.
That looked like you'll get the
Right,
because
Yeah, please. In
Yeah,
fact,
right.
let me ask you,
Yeah,
if there's
it's
something
like-
you can do for
But they agreed that
Boston.
it was
it
I'm planning the security track,
saying
and one of the
no.
panels I'm
Right,
doing
right,
is
right,
on
right, okay.
InfoSec and public policy and how,
But I mean,
you know, members of InfoSec
Yeah.
can engage.
Or you look at this,
Probably another one on machine learning.
like,
Yeah.
supposedly the guy who ordered the airstrike shut down was actually running
Be a
the
panelist on the.
They must be authorized
That
to
would
do
be,
that. Like,
it's.
somebody else eventually ended up getting credit, like, I was the,
They talked about
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Probably
yeah,
do an
yeah.
update on
but the
that.
actual guy who did it
What
was
has
actually a
changed,
colonel or something.
since that paper came out.
I know you may not be.
Yeah, so we make
Because
once someone in that area.
every year the test bed stuff, they're
Well,
rolling
one
it,
person
you know.
saying you are
Right.
my
Right.
next
Different
down
types of
there,
people
my
just
next
say,
down
yes,
born with
okay,
it, and
sounds
they
good.
do.
And the other thing is, you know, I mean, when you have orders, 7 layers of management, you know, honestly, I doubt that these other people are even like,
Presumably there's a lot of.
in many cases, yeah, it's like, I mean, there have been interesting studies of, sometimes you're better off giving the part to junior results. Because the senior results, rather than the 15 years ago, there's a lot of areas moved on, they're now making like, operational planning, and there's like,
I have never
they're
been
just
one
not
of
good
these,
for
I
you.
just, when you're researching
problems.
there's a lot of.
Well, like in a doctor's too, you know,
As well as.
sometimes the doctor
Yeah.
has to be some like an executive
For
manager or
example.
whatever. The people
Yeah.
think, oh, man, this guy is like, he's really good, but it's like actually, you know, well, or maybe you know, not that often, I mean, the very worst, you know,
Blockchain is,
crash,
you know, I've just lost.
There's a lot.
The guy who was the most member, he was the chief pilot. His job was to train and listen for a pilot. But he was not a flying pilot. Like, I mean, he didn't fly very often.
I took a job.
And the other pilots were so junior to him, that they were like, that's what he was going, you know, like, because he has done their life, you know,
I
so
found
then
out.
he was right, so, yeah, we do it, and like, you know, the other plane was still.
I still have a lot of friends and colleagues who
Right.
are still fighting the front end.
I know.
All that increasing efficiency.
Yeah.
Always trying to program.
Yeah, or something like
What's up,
that.
all that? Anyhow, the crazy joy that you have that one, I thought I was more like.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Right. There were at least two cases, one where, yeah, basically, you know, they remember, partly because from the Columbia one. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah, they're like, please let the runway.
Slovakia, they're very aggressive, you know, they're like, and their culture is different, you know.
Yeah.
It's like,
And they're like, please let the runway. Hold on. Because there's like, it is whereas the American countries that don't have to.
Yeah. Right.
You better get some support.
You let the OS decide.
Yeah.
Howard Government
Yeah.
sort of,
You can.
yeah, filter through.
So,
I mean, everyone's
Anyway, this was a much
Actually, I can do it with.
mellower
Dustin.
situation.
But then they did the problem is, you know,
I would have to space a lot of
they're American hands, they're used to
phones or.
because they're not flying right.
Yeah, we'll talk.
Nice to meet you. You were on the, was the.
Ari obviously
Right.
the
That was John. That's John.
Yeah.
Andrew's on the board.
He had a beard.
Yeah, we look a lot
You
like.
gonna be on the firehouse interview?
I am not.
I'm gonna go to
Well,
pleasure to
firehouse.
see you. Let's stay in touch. Know you guys.
I work in the state legislature and I'm looking at like online and data privacy issues and stuff. Okay. You guys can talk.